often. Hey everyone, welcome back to POVz. I'm Sophie, here on a mission to help us unify the world through conversation. Today, I'm joined by 4 incredible young people who are here to share their perspectives when it comes to the environment. And I don't know if I shared this with all of you before, but I am so excited to have this conversation for a host of reasons. But speaking personally, this is a topic that I very honestly don't know enough about. It's one that I try to learn about, I try to seek out information, but I don't know if I really have all the perspectives. So I'm really excited to come at it today, knowing more from each of you. So thank you all for being here. And this episode is also in partnership with our friends at August, an amazing lifestyle brand reimagining period care. And they're going to join us later today to tell us a little bit more about what they do. But starting off, I want to hit you all with a pretty quick and fast question. This is how we start off on POVz. We get to know each other through diving right in off the deep end. So first question off the bat is, will Gen Z leave the environment better than we found it? Benji, you want to start us off?
Yes, I think we will, and it's because our mentality is to prioritize the environment. And even though I don't know if we're doing it yet, I think that with all the technology and innovation that we're investing our time and energy into, that all those things will start to move in the right direction over the next couple of decades.
Mm-hmm. Would y'all agree that you think Gen Z does all agree that we should prioritize?
I think that's really optimistic. Like, I just feel like the way that the climate is going, I don't know, it's like rapidly declining, and we can try our best, but it's like the type of change that's needed is going to need to happen internally at these corporate environments, and like that's literally going to take us 5 to 10 years to be able to reach those senior executive levels to be able to make those changes. So, and I personally don't know how much control I have over that at this point in my life, when I'm also worried about like health insurance and just like a myriad of other things. Mm-hmm. So,
well, I think why I think
I
that
don't know.
It is optimistic, but like the United States has already started to decrease its emissions pretty substantially, and a lot of other developed countries are. It's not like as rapid as we need to, but like it's already heading that direction. It's already heading south of these high peaks that hopefully will never be reached again in terms of CO2. And it's because our generation is already having so much influence in politics and already having so much influence in like the marketplace. Like companies have to respond to us.
Do they?
Yeah, because
companies don't have to do anything.
Yeah, well, they do if they want to survive, because we have to be able, like they have to be able to survive by us purchasing their products and being part of their industry. And our demand for sustainability has has forced those companies to really start making progress. Where like there are a lot of major Fortune 500 companies now that are removing more carbon from the atmosphere than putting it into the atmosphere.
Interesting. Stella, Leon, what's your point of view?
I think like definitely a lot of teens like are worried about the crisis in like Gen Z in terms of like climate anxiety. Like 70 to like 80% of teens are worried about it like happening, but a lot of the times they aren't taking the necessary action to actually like make sure that they address the crisis in their personal life. And it is like to the point where how much are you really contributing as opposed to like the corporations that are making like the large amount of the carbon emissions. But like if we want to have Gen Z make more of an impact, we have to shift away from like the anxiety surrounding the crisis to how people can make like more sustainable life choices like in the long term.
Also, I think we're way too America and big other country centric. For instance, like there's gonna be like Tuvalu is gonna be the first country to like go away because of climate change, and even if we stop emissions like right now, also in their entirety, it's still probably gonna go away. And like I'm thinking to myself, like how many places can I visit before they're gone? And I'm like, that's so crazy to think about. It's like when people, it's like I feel like we're watching like there's whole countries that are gonna go away, and because we live in, you know, this big country, and we're like, we always think of like America, and we always think of like, or we think of other like big European countries, and we think of like the global north, and we don't ever think about like what's going to happen to Tuvalu, what's going to happen to St. Kitts and Nevis, what's going to happen to Nauru, what's going to happen to Vanuatu.
I personally don't care about other countries at this point, and like our own people and our own communities are still suffering. I feel like your point on anxiety is really valid. Like, I have so much anxiety around climate change. Like from the food deserts to the air. Like, I feel suffocated, and all I can do is focus on the things that I want to focus on, that I know I'll see more tangible changes, but I don't give a fuck what's happening in St. Kitts right now.
I'm not saying that like we shouldn't care what's happening in the United States or anything. I just feel like sometimes we forget that there's the whole world is suffering from climate change, and some people will literally lose the country that they live in. And like, I think like, you know, as important as it is to think about the United States as well, and obviously whatever country you live in, it's going to matter the most to you. But I do sometimes think that, especially in the United States, because we've always been really like United States centric, and we think about ourselves a lot because we are such a big country on the global stage, that sometimes we forget that everyone is impacted by it, not just the United States. Is what I'm kind of trying to get out. Not that it doesn't matter. I know what you're saying.
I think I'm at a point where I'm also trying to understand, like, the rural communities have different issues than I'm accustomed to. Mm-hmm. So like I'm trying to look at America as like different nations within one nation.
Because there totally is.
Yeah,
there's so many different ways, like, just people in the United States themselves face it, where like it's kind of also really overwhelming to think about how it's like happening. And even like in Nauru, like there's so many different ways people are affected in that country itself. In the United States, like every state you go to, even in those states themselves, everyone is like impacted differently and in different ways.
Yeah.
I just had a bunch of meetings with the Vatican about how they can bring the Catholic community involved more on climate change. And they're looking to America because obviously Catholicism is all over the world, right? But America has the types of cultures that mirror a lot of cultures in terms of like rural farming, forestry, like island countries with Hawaii, and like there's just so
South Carolina.
Right, South Carolina. There's so many places that mirror other parts of the world. Not that the cultures are the same, but the effects of like weather and climate change are the same. And how to adapt, how to look at policy, like how to look at that is actually fairly similar, because energy sources aren't different really. You know, solar there isn't different than solar here, and a hurricane there is not that much different than a hurricane here. So they're looking at that. And the United States, I think, could be a really good barometer for the rest of the world, to your point, but also caring about what we need to care about here in the United States.
And I think what's fascinating is that each of you are here with a different lens by which you approach this issue. Like Hiomi, I hear you talking about how we need to focus on the now, or Stella, you mentioned the global impacts. You know, Vihan, you're kind of torn between what needs to happen down the road versus what needs to happen right now. Can y'all share a little bit more about how your passions for this issue came about and what your perspective is really colored by? Like, is it by personal experience? Is it the work that you do in the space? How would you explain your entry point to all of this?
For me, like, whether it was like seeing my family in the suburbs or my family in the hood, I see the environmental impact and the disparities between the two communities. Like, I don't have the level of education that y'all have scientifically in climate change. I'm just a passionate person, but I do have like a lived experience of.
So it's more important than science, in my opinion.
I don't know about that. I'm a big fan of science. We love science here. But
your lived experience is what I care.
Well, lived experience of seeing other people, right? Like, so I grew up in LA. We're an extremely eco-friendly city in some ways, in other ways we're not. Like, homeless population is insane, and like, what does that impact on them? But then I moved to the Bronx, and I'm breaking out in literal rashes because there's no access to like organic fish and meat. I don't eat meat, but like fish. There's no access to organic produce. The air quality in the Bronx is the worst. I've like literally felt the impact on my lungs. Like, the streets are not as clean as they should be. And so my entry point is like seeing the racial disparities in it. It drives me insane. Like, it makes me want to cry because it's so apparent. So
thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
For me, I think it was also like not really more with myself, but kind of seeing my family in different countries. Like both of my parents are immigrants, and my mom, like, she immigrated from Australia, and my dad came from India. And so in both of those places, like, the climate impacts aren't really seen here. Like, they definitely are. Like, my dad was from like Delhi and Jaipur, and there they have really bad air quality, and that's like personally affected my grandparents there in terms of their health and things like that. And then also in Australia, like, my family like lives really close to where like the worst wildfires were like a few years ago, like in the outback and things like that. And so I guess that kind of like fueled my interest from there. But then from there, I think it was more of like the work that I did. Like, I banded with a few teens in my area during the COVID pandemic to like form a branch of an international organization. And then from there, we kind of like morphed into our own organization. But what really like pushed me to keep going was just being able to unite with a lot of different teens who had those different perspectives, so that I have mine, but like the more important part of the organization is like trying to learn from others. And then kind of, I feel like the power of an organization, especially of youth, is like you're able to bring together so many different perspectives, but you all have that one purpose, which is to like combat climate change and educate people. And so I think that's what's like kept me going for sure.
Yeah.
Stella, what about you?
Me, it's a mix of like, before I ever like did any like climate activism or got involved in anything, I remember my first experience was in Delhi, was on an airplane with my mother, and my dad was a pilot, and we traveled a lot when I was little, and I grew up a lot in Southeast Asia. And I remember there was a lot of smog, and there was a lot of pollution and stuff. And I remember one day, because we had a lot of friends in India, one day when we were visiting, when we were descending, there was just so much smog I couldn't see anything. And I was like, are those clouds? And I remember my mom explaining to me like what smog was, and my mom explained to me like climate change and stuff on like a 3-year-old level, sort of, or a 4-year-old level. And I remember just being like, damn it, that's great. And I was like, but the whole world isn't like this, because I was like, when we go back to my grandparents in like Pennsylvania, it doesn't look smoggy. And that's when my mom had to be like, no, in some places it's not, in some places it is. And there's a big privilege part to it and stuff. And, I don't remember exactly what she said because I was so young, but I remember that was the first time I became cognizant of the climate does not look the same for everyone, and there's a reason for that. And it has to do with a lot of oppression and racism and like capitalism and all of these systems that I wasn't even really aware of. I just, on a little kid level, I was like, there's an inequality here. So I guess a lot of mine is, again, rooted in more international too, because of that, because my first experience was thinking about it was in Southeast Asia more so than in the US.
My family really made it a priority to spend time in nature when I was growing up, whether that was in Wisconsin, just going to the forest, or occasionally would be able to do road trips to national parks and stuff. And that really just grew my love for the outdoors, and to know that we were having such a negative impact on it really tore me up when I would go in those places, because I just thought my duty is to protect this, not destroy it. And I felt like our generation doesn't see the issue in terms of politics. I was really active in politics, and I felt like the older generation was using this as a political tool to win elections on both sides, that Democrats just use it as a way to get elected as being pro-climate, pro-environment, and Republicans go to the opposite side because that's how, unfortunately, tribal our politics is today, to also win elections and to basically just have more power. So that's why I was brought to it. But I would say what I've really tried to do since then is use the platform that I have to go and visit all these communities that are being impacted, and try to visit as many places as possible. Whether I did a 60-day road trip in an electric vehicle in 36 different states, toured all these different climate programs and projects. And so many stereotypes are wrong.
I didn't think about it from more of like a hopeful perspective of like being a younger child. Like, I feel like in elementary school, we had an Earth Club, and the entry point was just like, I think my best friend Madison and I were in it together, and we're still best friends to this day. And like, we were in the soil with our like Mother Gray, who was our chaplain, and that was our entry point to the environment too, was just like putting your hand in the dirt, planting, and learning about how to grow a tree or like grow a piece of food. Like, for sure, that's something that I didn't think about too. When you talk about climate change, at least for me right now, it's anxiety driven.
And I think that's actually the problem, because
the hopeful perspective.
I think that's the problem, because if you disconnect those two, which in society we're kind of told to, it doesn't make you. And when you feel anxious and you feel like there's no chance to solve it, it like really, it's like anything in life where you're anxious about it. It makes you kind of freeze up and not feel like you can do anything about it. And to your point, like we need to be able to feel like we can make steps in the right direction. Otherwise, we won't take the steps in the right direction. But if you marry your love of the physical environment, which you had at such a young age, with the fight for climate, that's like what it's about, right? It's like it's about people and it's about the planet, and that's really powerful.
And I think as we get older, it becomes more of a political issue.
Yeah.
Benji, like you said, climate change is oftentimes used as a tool for political gain. So I'd be curious to know, do y'all think that it's wrong of us to think of climate change as a political issue or a partisan issue? And rather, should we be thinking of it as a human rights issue or a global issue? How would you contextualize what the issue is?
That's a good question.
I feel like it's definitely not a political issue, or like it obviously has become in like our society, but I feel like it definitely is more of a human rights issue, especially like with all the topics we've talked about, like environmental justice and environmental racism, just like with like people of different races and different income groups are being faced differently, and that's something that like everyone has to recognize. But besides that, it's also a science issue, like where there's like climate deniers who don't even believe it exists, and even though the science like obviously proves that it does. So I feel like it's not a political issue, but it has been.
I 100% agree with you. I don't think it should be a political issue, and it's interesting because in a lot of other countries too, like it isn't considered as much of a political issue. Like in a lot of other countries, most of the big political parties all agree that climate change is a problem, and they might disagree on everything else, but climate change sort of is something that does bring them together. Not everywhere, but I think the US is especially like divided on climate change in a way that isn't seen as much, especially in other like democracies.
I didn't think of it like I feel like I would have said yes to the political issue, but after hearing your point, like definitely human rights issue. I would have said yes to political because like where people dump chemicals, where people dump trash, or companies dump trash, like it's politically driven who they're deciding is like going to impact their environment, but that is a human rights issue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it honestly does come down to the future of humanity. Like I think it's broader to me than human rights even. It's just like, I mean, I guess human rights fall within humanity, but like we will be okay. Like people on this couch will be okay for our lives in terms of adapting, but it's about the next generation and the generation after that, and the future of people that is really at risk. The planet will survive. The planet will be able to adapt. Like there were ice ages where some of the warmest animals that live in the warmest place on Earth were able to adapt, just like when it was really hot, millions of years ago, other animals like survived. Like they will be able to survive. It's us that really can't in these island nations and other places. And I think what I've found to be the reason that it's so politicized is not that it's that one side doesn't want to care about the environment, it's that one side doesn't feel like they have a stake at the table. And like when you
what do you mean? Can you like give a specific example?
So like you guys all heard about that East Palestine, Ohio.
I was just gonna
thing.
Yeah.
That was a very Trump town. And they're destroyed, their rivers destroyed, their water's destroyed, their air's destroyed, and they were super worried about it. But they don't really feel like they have a voice at the table because the typical environmental movement, honestly, it's about language a lot of the times. Like environmental racism and environmental justice doesn't really speak to those communities. Like because
do you think it's because you're describing it as environmental language and environmental justice?
No, it's because like if you're saying that like we need to stand up for like just the folks who are affected by environmental racism, then they're like, but like we also are having problems with the environment too, and like we're not at the table, and like farmers who are struggling to put crops in their field because of climate change, like no one really thinks about them and no one talks about it.
But see, like this is where our perspectives are different because for me, farmers are black, farmers are brown,
right?
So that is racist.
Well, no, but proportionally, population-wise, like I have two of these farms. Yeah, right. I'm talking about right now.
The original farmers.
Right, I'm talking about right now. Right, I'm talking about the way that
the
this issue is
evolution
today.
of the history of the environment is what like that is a part of the discussion. So your perspective is based on like your knowledge of farmers being white, right?
No, I'm just talking about farmers today. Oftentimes, don't feel like the reason that it's so politicized for them is that they don't feel represented at the table. Like
But I'm
regardless of
saying
50
black
years
farmers and brown farmers today still don't feel represented, so they
ago.
have it.
Totally, which is why they both don't feel represented. And I'm just saying
But
that
then you're segmenting the two communities by saying that environmental racism doesn't appeal to white farmers because they
people. It's like if you were trying to reach somebody in a super urban area and you were talking about how farmers were really struggling about climate change, that wouldn't resonate as much as you were talking unless you were talking about something that was more relevant in an urban community. And I've seen that like in Seattle. Like Seattle people like totally laugh off farmers and they like basically see it as like flyover country. Just like the people in flyover country see Seattle as like these urban elite people. And I'm saying there's a disconnect between these communities.
And I believe the disconnect stems from how you're describing it. Like
if you're a rural farmer, black or white or whatever, and the face of the environmental movement is like John Kerry and Al Gore and Greta, like that's not relatable to your life at all. Like it just has nothing to do with what you struggle with on a day-to-day basis. And that's what I'm saying. Like the language and the people that we're using turn off a huge proportion of the population. Just like if Donald Trump was the face of something that should be bipartisan, there's a whole group that would not want that. Just like when Al Gore is the face of the climate movement, like half the country's like, whoa, like I voted against this guy for a reason.
Clearly we've got a whole lot to talk about today. And I love that you brought up the aspect of environmental racism in the context of evolution and now. And I want to bring us back to the community that I want to focus on today, really, which is Gen Z. But before we do, let's just take a really quick break, and then we'll pick it back up. Okay, awesome.
Okay.
That was good.
Well, my favorite type of almond milk is Good Karma. So, have you tried Good Karma?
We'll keep it going. But first of all, welcome back to POVz. We're here today again talking all about the environment from 4 amazing young people and their perspectives. So we're going to pick up the conversation in our next segment where we start to layer in perspectives from the larger Gen Z community. So just as a reminder, if you want your voice represented on this episode and you can't physically be here in person, you can still join the conversation. All you have to do is just send a text message to our text line, and our number is 877-222-1119. Text the word POVz and we'll get you involved in the conversation. So starting us off, I'm going to read a perspective actually from Aidan Cohn Murphy, who founded Gen Z for Change. I've had him on the show recently, and I wanted to kick us off with this because I think it's going to be a spicy one. So Aidan said, the only way in which someone can be a conservative climate activist is if they're a conservative on most issues, but push for science-based progressive solutions needed. Conservative climate policies aren't real. How would y'all respond to that?
I feel like there are, like, you could think like climate solutions that are also focused on the like economy or like the pro-market perspective, like in terms of stuff that Biden has done, like the EV tax credits, like those are things that would appeal to someone who might like not really care about the climate, like in terms of that, but they're like going to get they're going to get money from like helping out the climate even if they don't care about it themselves.
But like also like Willow is happening now today.
Yeah,
Actually. So
literally
like
today.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like yes and no, but yeah,
well, it has nothing to do with conservative.
well no, I just mean like when we were talking about like Biden, like with like the Democrats right now with climate change, like I feel like they're very mixed, you know.
Yeah.
Like they do one good thing one day and then they kind of continue doing one thing bad the next day, and I'm kind of like I don't know how to feel about you guys. Yeah, but sorry, I kind of feel like because climate change and like environmental justice is so tied into like racial justice and like climate change by definition impacts lower income people, women, people of color, disabled people way more than it ever affects more privileged people. So like to me, you can't ignore all those other things and be like, oh, I'm in favor of protecting the climate, but I also don't see that it also impacts X, Y, and Z communities more than it impacts my community or whatever. Like I feel like it's pretending that you can be like, it's almost like pretending that all the other issues don't matter that go along with it. So it's like I'm just gonna select this little part and then try to make it non-political. And while I don't think that climate change is inherently political, it's become political. And then you can't just say, I'm not going to make it political all of a sudden now that it already is political, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know. I feel like you can't really be conservative with everything else and be like, racism isn't a thing, or sexism isn't a thing, or, ableism isn't a thing, and then be like, oh, but actually...
I don't know any conservatives who think that, if I'm being honest.
Who think that none of those things exist?
That's a really big stereotype that I think is false.
I think that you can recognize that they're a thing and then not really do anything about them. And then there are definitely people who don't think that they're a thing at all, because I definitely have met some people, especially where like my grandparents live, that they like will straight up look at me and be like, you think sexism is still a thing, ha ha ha, or you think racism is still a thing, ha ha ha. So I do think that it's a little hopeful to think that no one thinks that anymore, but I do agree with you. I think that there are a lot more conservatives nowadays that don't think those things, and I don't want to say that all conservatives do. I'm just saying there are still people who do that at the same time say that climate change is important to solve, and I'm like, those two, you can't hold those two at the same time, really.
I just feel like I don't really understand the difference between the political parties anymore, so it's hard for me to say like they're conservative climate activists versus like liberal climate activists, because I grew up thinking like the difference in the political parties was based on fiscal beliefs, right? Like, and I think that is something I've had to like process, especially coming from LA. Like, you could really be a Trump supporter, but be the most like liberals, have the most liberal social political beliefs, but purely be a Trump supporter because of like, you're rich and you want better tax breaks. Mm-hmm. And so when it comes to like, when you incorporate climate change into it, for me, it's hard to like even wrap my head around. Like, I don't even know what the fuck conservative climate activism means. Like, because I don't know what, like, climate activism is climate activism. And then, but if you want to like talk about maybe if you're a conservative and you believe in investing in war and like the impact of like the investments of Lockheed Martin in these different foreign countries and how does that impact those environments, then I guess like, yeah, you could be a conservative, but then that still stems from like fiscal beliefs. So,
well, Benji, do you want to share a little bit about
like
your
what does that even
Yeah,
mean?
I think the original statement's a very ignorant one, because like that conservatives can't like be pro climate unless they buy into like a progressive agenda, because there are more than one. There's more than one way to skin a cat. There's more than one way to solve climate change, and it doesn't always have to be like a liberal progressive approach.
But what is a liberal progressive approach?
A liberal progressive approach is like federal government first, and federal government putting as many regulations and kind of hamstringing certain things on the economy and telling that people can and can't do things, trying to basically regulate the way out of it. And I think the conservative way is really about innovating and incentivizing and looking at partnering like economic growth with protecting the environment. Because at the end of the day, like what we believe is that if you are low income, you will never, and this is just inherently true, you will not care about the environment as a top priority to vote on or whatever if you're worried about getting clean water, like getting food, like your healthcare, like all these things that you even brought up, like about how there's other issues on your mind, right? There's other issues on my mind. There's other issues on everyone's
Did you grow
minds.
up low income?
No, but I'm saying like I've visited and spent a lot of time in low income communities where like this isn't a number one issue for them, because there are so many other issues that are like so pressing day to day that you have to make those other issues go away. For someone like caring about climate change is honestly somewhat of a privilege. I mean, I've been to third world countries where this is like, it's impacting them the most, but it's not their number one issue. Their number one issue is like personally is like putting food on the table and being able to feed their families and make ends meet. And you have to be able to give people the opportunity to have a flourishing life before this issue is something that they can actually, like, you can't expect people to pay more for transportation, pay more for energy, pay more for these things in the name of climate if they don't have the resources to do so already. And I think that that's like a conservative approach, is that we have to make it economical to be pro-climate. Otherwise, there's no chance to solve it. And that's a different approach, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to solve the problem. And I think that's an unfair statement that they have.
Yeah, well, just to add something real quick to that is, I do think it's interesting too, like, it's a privilege to be able to care about climate change that much.
I had never heard, like, conservative climate activism described, period, but that well, so thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That
I
was
also
really
think
great
there's like
explanation.
a kind of an education gap in
Yes.
terms of the issue itself. Like from like the Gen Z perspective, like how are you supposed to even care about something if you don't know that it exists or if you don't know the intricacies of it, like we're like kind of discussing right now. So like the people who are like lower income, they're also often not getting the same level of education or even like the same depth of education into the issue. So I feel like that is also really important if you want to empower people who wouldn't normally like care about it because they do have different things to worry about, is if you ingrain it into the education system at a really like younger level and teach people to care about it as a part of like other things you care about. Like there are like some school systems obviously offer stuff like how to do personal finance and things like that. And other schools also like don't even offer that.
They do?
Yeah,
I was
like,
about to
some
say,
schools,
help
like-
with that.
like-
Yeah, great point. Like I think there's an interesting conversation at least happening in the Gen Z space around Gen Z activism in the climate space. And I think a lot of you have probably critiqued activism to some degree of it appearing performative, especially around this issue. But I'd love to know, like in thinking about how a lot of people are uneducated about the issue, would you rather people enter this movement without that education and it veer on the performative side, or not have that entry point at all? What do you think is the lesser of two evils?
I think it's more important to be informed about it than entering in and like doing like random things. Like the whole like thing about Gen Z is like posting like Instagram graphics, which like I think like is good to an extent, like because you're trying to like show that you care about it. But like a lot of the times like these graphics are also spreading misinformation, which also then like makes the issue even worse. So I think it's better to like not come in and do like super performative stuff like doing graphics and things like that, and instead just be informed about it and then choose what you choose to do based on what you can do, like in terms of your living situation.
That's interesting.
Facebook had me help like advise them on like a misinformation campaign, and they said that it's almost even how much they struggle with the misinformation of people saying climate change isn't real versus people who are saying climate change is like going to kill us all tomorrow, and like that mentality, because they of course have their like fact checks to like specific entities that have like really credible information, and they said it was almost even how much both sides are over dramatizing the information, where like for our generation we're more on like the doomsday side of things, and I do think that that hurts us a lot because it does stall progress. And like if you are just posting random stuff that makes everyone feel like there's no chance that we can ever do anything about this, that's also false potentially, then you're actually like losing people in the fight, in my opinion.
But do you feel like at the same time being overly alarmist is just as bad as not believing it exists?
I actually do believe that.
Interesting. This reminds me of another perspective. I want to throw another one in. This is from our community. It says, it brings us back to the activism piece. Throwing cake at the Mona Lisa or gluing yourself to Van Gogh are 0% productive. Activists who choose to pull public stunts are just as bad for the movement as climate deniers, in my opinion. What are your thoughts?
I would agree.
Do you think it's 0% productive? Do you think there's
I mean, it
truth to
definitely
that?
draws
I think it's
attention
negative
to
percent.
it, but it's like kind of the thing like, is all attention good attention, or is all publicity good publicity?
Yeah.
Because
Is it?
like if you're trying to get the people, or like the more like, so we talked about conservative climate activists, but like if you're trying to get the people that wouldn't normally care about it to pass the policies that are going to like enhance the like initiatives that are taken, like nobody's going to want to do it if like the like extremes on one side are like doing stuff like this that like destroys really famous pieces of art or like takes away from like cultural things that everyone like appreciates, then people are just like less likely to like want to be a part of it at all. So I feel like
You
it takes
can-
away from it.
You can be performative and have it still be relevant. Like gluing yourself or destroying a piece of art doesn't make sense to me of how like that would positively impact the climate. But the young lords like would literally take the trash from the Bronx and the Heights that the city wouldn't pick up for weeks on end and put it out in the streets to disturb the entire city and like all the citizens of New York. That was the ultimate performative activism, and it like shifted how the government saw the uptown, like, and that is climate activism. So they didn't have Meta or TikTok back then to like help amplify it.
Right.
But it is the equivalent of what would be considered performative activism, but it just was relevant. Like, it made sense.
I am going to keep us moving. I'm going to throw in another perspective. So this one actually come close. This one comes from our community. This is from Alia, who I interviewed on the street. So tell me your take on this.
Drop a hot take. Golf is a little overrated. It's extremely bad for the environment, often infringes on Indigenous people's rights, and it's really not that fun.
Wow, no one's ever brought up golf on the show. How is golf bad for the environment?
So it takes up a lot of land, it takes up a lot of water for that land. Huge amount of forestry, natural wildlife is cut down for it. It disrupts a lot of space for community well-being. So, instead of a park for kids, it's like an exclusive golf club. There are more environmentally friendly sports. I think everybody should go outside and enjoy the environment, but in a more inclusive and beneficial way for everybody.
What are your thoughts?
I feel like golf and skiing are like the rich people sports of choice.
Oh, I love to ski.
And
my great-grandfather was on the National Ski Patrol, and he
No
was
way.
not wealthy.
that
at
is
all.
really cool. I'm just saying those are like the stereotypes of what you think of. Like, I feel like when you think of like rich people pastimes, I feel like you usually think of like golf and skiing. And like, for instance, I don't like the people that I know that I feel like, at least in my life experience, the more people skied or played golf, the richer they were in my experience. So I kind of have that bias in my head of being like, oh, I kind of associate them together. But I definitely agree, especially in terms of golf, not so much skiing, that it is, I'm not sure that there's as much of an environmental, I'm not sure that the pros outweigh the cons with golfing. So I kind of agree with that person, but I also don't know as much about it as
Does
I feel like
anyone
I should.
disagree with Stella?
I just think it depends on like where it is, like,
and what they're using. Because if they're using like
Oh.
recycled sewer water or something, like, then that's different.
Yeah.
But if they're like
Most
in the middle of
places
a
don't.
desert, like in Arizona, where
Yeah.
I'm living, there's hundreds of golf courses in the
Yeah.
middle of a desert, and it's the only thing that's green, and then there's a water problem. But it's like, how are you going to tell people to not, like, in my opinion, telling people not to do things hardly ever like works. Like, if someone has a hobby that's that, and then you try to pit that against them, then they fight back hard because they feel like this is the one thing I do to relax. Like, you're gonna take that away from me? I don't know.
you don't have to tell people not to do it, but you don't have to continue to expand. Like, that person's point is like really valid.
True.
Golfing ranges are like expanding a lot
Yeah.
in areas where there is no water.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
And a piece of her perspective that I think I had never considered is maybe the impact
Indigenous.
that
I did
golf
not.
could have on that, which reminds me of
Yeah.
another perspective. So throwing my last one in here, this is a community perspective that says the U.S. owes reparations to all of the Indigenous people whose land we've destroyed. Do you agree?
I mean, the U.S. owes reparations
Yeah.
to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm like, where do we start?
I mean, like, you can do reparations in terms of different things that end up benefiting them right now, like not locating like power plants next to indigenous like reserves and things like that, reservations. So you don't have to do reparations in terms of money, but I definitely think the U.S. owes like the indigenous people a lot of things for the things that they've done for a long time, which have been centered around the environment.
I would say I would rather have us start making good decisions now than I'd rather have us make good decisions now than like try to reverse the past, because at what point I just feel like that's really hard to like figure out, because we've made a lot of mistakes in the past. That's like what history is. It's a lot of mistakes. And I don't know how you grapple with all those realities of colonialism that like were pervasive through most of our last few hundred years, and then suddenly like try to like reverse it all. Like, I just feel like that's a really dangerous game to play when you should be starting to focus on what we can do right now. And that's just my
So that's also like why I said like reparations doesn't have to be like, oh, we're giving you money to like make up for the things that we've done to you in the past. Like, you can take steps to like empower those communities in the present. So like trying to invest in like jobs for indigenous people, and like investing in like making sure they have better living situations, all of that, like it is reparations, because it's like kind of making up for the stuff that's done in the past, but it's not just like shoving it off with giving you some money. And it also like helps the problem right now instead of focusing on the past.
Yeah.
Thank you both
I
for
like
that
that.
perspective. I think we should just take another quick break and then
I love
we'll
that.
pick that up.
Yeah.
I'd never considered that before, by the way. And we're back. Thank you so much for joining us here on POVz. I am thrilled to introduce our surprise guest today, the one, the only Nadia Okamoto. She is a founder, a CEO, an entrepreneur, a content creator, an author of Period Power, the host of the Tigress podcast, and the founder of an incredible brand called August, which is a lifestyle brand reimagining period care through their lineup of tampons, pads, and liners, all helping us be more sustainable and opening up more conversations about those who menstruate. So without further ado, I'm so excited to welcome Nadia. Yay! Come on in. Come on. Welcome to POVz. Here's what you missed. We're having a conversation today all about the environment, especially around our perspectives and experiences that led us to our points of view. So I'd love to start with your point of view on the question we're kind of going back and forth about today, which is, will Gen Z leave the environment better than we found it?
No, I don't think so, because I think that, a lot of the Gen Z culture, I think, is coming to terms with the fact that this problem exists, but the innovation to repair the environment is, a lot slower and making slower progress than I think that we would like. And in the meantime, while those solutions are being developed, our whole global community is still harming the environment. And so I think that we might be able to slow down a lot of that harm, but, the nature of having more people on the planet, and also a generation that consumes more than others before us and expects more efficiency and all of that, it definitely will be in a worse off place, but hopefully not worsening at the fast rate that we are now.
It's definitely in line with what we've already been talking about, which is great. And Nadia, I'm so grateful that we get to partner with you on this episode. We've got your products here on the shelf, and I know sustainability was a part of the process in building your brand. To what extent do you feel like sustainability is a must-have nowadays? And tell us a little bit about the process of founding August and why you included that in your own product.
Yeah, I would say that, sustainability was a really big part of the inspiration to create August, because as a menstruator myself, I grew up using tampons, pads, and either not liking the pads because they felt plasticky, or, just learning about these different stats around how much waste they created. Like, most pads take 5 to 8 centuries to decompose, and the stat that most maxi pads have enough plastic for 3 to 5 plastic bags. So I think that there's a lot of innovation to be done around the period space, and I actually started on the nonprofit side, and I think really found myself after 6 years of running a nonprofit, I was kind of stuck in this, honestly, corporate cog, even as a nonprofit, because you're so dependent on a lot of these larger corporations to do the fundraising, to get the product, to start actually making momentum there. And so I kind of crossed over to the side of running a VC-backed business, but trying to build a more sustainable brand. And a lot of people, they hear about what products we make and they're like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. How can you call yourself sustainable, but be making tampons with a plastic applicator, or making pads that you still throw out after one use? But the reality was, when we first started talking to our community, was we were like, okay, should we make menstrual cups? Let's just everybody get on menstrual cups. It's the most sustainable option. But 99% and more of our community had either never heard of a menstrual cup or had no interest, sticking something that big looking into their vaginas, holding the bloody menstrual cup, interacting with it. So there was this kind of layer of not being familiar with that part of your body and comfort touching the period blood. So actually something we talk about a lot from the period side is, this is a product line where you care about sustainability, but you will not sacrifice efficacy, and you won't sacrifice if it makes you uncomfortable to use. So I do hope that we will eventually launch menstrual cups and more sustainable options, but we kind of came in with this idea of, we need to first build brand loyalty and brand trust, right? Because here are all these companies that have had a stronghold on menstruators as a huge industry, with kind of no questions asked, no accountability, because it is already so stigmatized. And so even when these companies have gotten in trouble for lack of ingredient transparency, unethical supply chains, because periods are stigmatized. There's kind of like this veil over it. And so we came out with not the most sustainable period products, but what we believe are the most sustainable pads and tampons that are more comfortable, so we can really be bringing people in. And then also kind of taking away the stigma around periods and talking about the business side of things, so that when people ask us about where the products are made, what our global supply chain looks like, are we carbon neutral, that information is all very publicly accessible.
I mean, Nadia brings up an interesting point. I'd love to ask all of you this question. I think it's interesting that you said your products are all made with sustainability in mind, but you don't encourage people to sacrifice efficacy or other factors. Do you all feel like when you're choosing a sustainable brand, you have to sacrifice other things that are important to you?
No, not always, but those are the ones that actually break through in terms of they actually work, because this is the point I was trying to make earlier, which I love that you said this, because people are not going to spend more or put themselves at a bigger inconvenience just to be sustainable. But if you can make being sustainable more effective, more convenient, more cost effective, then that's where the change happens. And I love that you're doing that. That's super cool.
I think around the periods space specifically too, it's like, look, at the end of the day, are you going to choose to use a plastic filled pad, or are you going to choose to like bleed through your clothes, right? And I think before August, it was like there was this assumption that the sustainable pads didn't work, right? But I think that was a whole part of our argument, is not only do you switch over and you're using more sustainable product, like the product's actually just better. It's like more leak proof, it's softer. And so, you know, I think we met working in Gen Z marketing. And I think that when we were working together, I was more on the consulting side, like working with these companies where they were like trying to lean into
You are being humble. She wasn't just consulting. She was leading. Everything we know about Gen Z culture, Gen Z marketing stems from this girl right here. Like, she set the blueprint. So
Thanks.
Let's put that on record.
But when we were working with these like huge conglomerates, like we would have these internal conversations where we'd be like, wait, so we're making a sustainable campaign, but like, is the product different? No. Is the product better? No. Is it the same product? Yeah. You know, so like, I think that was a really big part of this, which is like, we're not going to claim to be the most sustainable. Like, we use plastic, and like, that is something that we own. But what we can say is that like, we're going to be really transparent about how we can make incremental change and be super open to that.
Absolutely.
I'm sold. I use Honey Pot, but I'll buy. I'll support. I'm sold.
Yeah, I had a question for you. So like, as Gen Z, like, how are we supposed to know, like, the average person, if like a company is like greenwashing or is actually making sustainable change? Because a lot of the times, like, kids want to like invest in like sustainable things, and it is more expensive. But there's also the time where like, how are we supposed to know if you're actually doing something, or you're just doing that for publicity to sound better?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is the unfortunate reality is it's a lot on, like, the onus is really on the consumer, right? It's like they have to go out and ask the right questions. I think that this is where, by developing new sorts of third-party auditors, you know, I think that there's a lot of that with like, you know, you have like the climate neutral certification, and you have like 1% for the planet certification, B Corp certification. You know, I think that there are third-party sort of auditors out there, but I would say that a lot of it is just like doing your due diligence. I think that one of the things that we really tried to push at August was just like available information, because I remember when we were starting and designing our website even, I was like, let me just try to figure out like where my current period products are made. And I just like could not figure out like where they're made, like what sort of inspections happen so that like ethical codes of conduct are, you know, up to code in manufacturing spaces, like understanding supply chain. And so I think for us, it was just like, let's just provide as much information as possible. And honestly, not a lot of people look at our traceability page, but the people who do like really appreciate it. And I think that's why we share it. I would also say that like a lot of what we're trying to do as a brand is like educate consumers as well, because for example, one of the things that we're actually grappling with right now is we're changing the way we use the term biodegradable. Because when we came into you know, the world as a brand, we said, hey, guess what? Most pads take 5 to 8 centuries to decompose. Ours take 12 months. But when we said that over and over again, because like that is the information that we got, there were tests that showed that they were biodegradable. But what we got educated on, the more and more we learned about waste management in the States, is that like nothing is really biodegradable, right? In airtight landfills, a carrot doesn't fucking change, you know? So I think that a lot of what we're trying to do as a brand, and I think we have a responsibility to, is like, we're coming out and saying like, hey, can we say biodegradable? Like, technically, yes, but here's why we're not going to use it in the same way, because like that was us kind of like unintentionally greenwashing without giving context to like where these products go after use. So I'd say, like, to answer your question, I do think that it is a lot on the consumer to like educate themselves, know what questions to ask, know what buzzwords to look into. But I think also at the same time, like, it is a responsibility of brands to also be at the forefront of that education, to be more transparent. And I think that for us, it's really exciting to see these new sorts of certifications come into life that are about climate neutrality and, you know, seeing how they're actually offsetting carbon footprint and things like that.
And Nadia, while you're here, I mean, do all of you follow Nadia on all the socials? Because if not, you have to. But Nadia is someone, I mean, you know this, but I admire you so much for the way that you unapologetically advocate for your mission and what you care about, even to the point where you're doing things that no one's ever done before, right? You're breaking down an extremely stigmatized issue. And I think you've brilliantly marketed this issue in a way that breaks through all of the noise, but that sometimes errs on the side of being controversial because not a lot of people are talking about periods and menstruation. So I'd love to know, for all of us here and for anyone watching this, what advice do you have for young people who really want to be out there in the world advocating for an issue they care about and wanting to break through the noise while also not distracting from the issue, which I feel like can be tough when sometimes the only way to break through the noise is to be controversial?
Yeah, I would say I'm definitely not the first to like, you know, post about periods or, you know, I feel like I'm coming at the coattails of like centuries of advocacy because menstruation has been so stigmatized for so long. So I would say that, but I would also say like, yeah, I mean, I post videos of my actual period blood on social media. I'm on my period right now, and I definitely was like making content like showing my bloody applicator before this. So like, I definitely do that, and not a lot of people do that. I would say that for me, it's not, maybe it's just like the way my brain thinks, but I don't make that content thinking like, oh, I need to be controversial to like beat the algorithm. I started doing that actually like 6 years into my advocacy. Like when I was running the nonprofit, I never did that. This is only since I was showing product, but it actually stemmed from people being like, how can you prove to us that like your pads actually work, right? Or they would say, oh, I hate how other brands use blue liquid and you use red liquid, it's more accurate. And me kind of realizing like, well, if you're asking me to see how it works, like let me show you how it actually works. And yeah, you have a good point. Like blue liquid is so inaccurate, not only because periods aren't blue in ads, but also like it's not just liquid, right? Like your period blood is a different consistency. There could be clots and all these things. So for me, it was like it was never like oh, this is controversial. And like, I knew it was weird and like out of the box, but it was like, it just felt so obvious to me of like, the people are asking for this. And so I'm just going to do that. And I really lean into that. Does that mean that I get a lot of death threats and like awful messages and so much hate? Really? It's so bad. It's so bad. But does that mean we get a lot of shit like that? Yes, because unfortunately periods are like weirdly so controversial. But I think that for me, it's really worth it. And kind of getting to your answer, I think that there are three main things that really allow me to like keep going, which is like, one, I know my shit. Like when people question my intentions or they say like, you're an attention whore for doing this, like what, that's the only reason why you would post your period blood, like it's too far. They say this is disgusting, this is hurting the feminist movement, you're stupid, trans men don't get periods, you know, all these things. Like I've been in this space for so long, did so much research around the book, and even outside of what you see online, like I did my whole college career on like trying to study these things. I've like done so much reading about it. I'm even on the academic side. And so for me, I feel like I'm very confident in my own reasoning on why posting period blood on social media, like how that fits into centuries long of sociology in the world around period stigma, gender roles and things like that, that when people question that, I'm kind of like, well, like, let's talk about this because like I'm really confident on why I do the things that I do. And so it kind of is like, you know, things that don't really affect me. I would say second, like a lot of it is that I have an incredible team around me like with the people that I work with or even family and friends, where like sometimes I do take things maybe too far, which is like I will do a sexy photo shoot in with a tampon string hanging out, right? And sometimes people are like, that's too far. And I might not think it's too far, but it's more like contextualizing, okay, like maybe the world is not ready for that. So like I'm gonna do baby steps till I get there. So I think I have a lot of honest people around me and like it's an open discussion. And then third, I would say like a lot of it is a mental health thing. Like a lot of it is like when I'm feeling insecure about, you know, putting myself out there and advocating for these things, I tell myself, like, if I was only getting positive feedback, then it would mean that I'm not making any change, because it means I'm just speaking to a fucking vacuum of people who already agree with me.
Echo chamber.
Yeah, echo chamber. The only way that, like, seeing that hate and that ridicule is just showing me, like, I am reaching people who have never thought this way before, right? And honestly, the messages from those people who started off as haters and then became really good, big fans, like, those are what keep me going too. I'd also say, like, I'm very open about having borderline personality disorder, which is like basically having very low natural self-esteem and like conception of self. So I think a lot of it is I really work on my mental health in that sense, but I also am able to kind of look at what is said about me online or to me online, and I'm like, nothing trolls say is going to be worse than like what I've said to myself. And so in that sense, I do think I have like a little bit more of this armor, like being online, being on social.
Thank you for sharing that with all of us, and thank you for being
That's
here.
awesome.
Yeah, I mean, Nadia, you're doing amazing things, and I think something that resonated is your ability to know that you're breaking through the noise when you reach that criticism. And I think to some degree that's why we're all here today. Like we believe that if we can showcase these different perspectives in conversation with one another, we can break through that noise and burst people's bubbles to some degree. So thank you for doing that in your own way. Thank you for being here. And before you go, I would just love to open it up to all of you to kind of share how you felt after our conversation today. Obviously, there was so much more we could have talked about. I feel like we just skimmed the surface, but again, unity doesn't happen overnight. We can have 50 of these and still be working through these conversations. To what extent are you leaving today better understanding something about yourself or about someone else on the couch?
I was just gonna say, I think it was really interesting to hear more about like the conservative climate advocacy side. I think that was like one of the main things that I took away. Like I didn't really think about that beforehand. And then also, one thing that you said that really resonated with me is like when you're working in like a controversial space or things that have been stigmatized in society, like knowing your stuff is like the way that you can make sure you get through. Because like people can insult you all you want, or they can come at you, but you just like come back with knowing what you know, because you know that that's correct. And having that knowledge and that education, I feel is like super important. So I feel like it was just really interesting to hear what everyone else had to say about that as well.
Love that.
I feel like for me, it was the hope and resilience. Because I think that, like, right now, in the context of, like, climate activism, but then just also in general, like, starting off so early in the workforce, like, you get to a point where I feel surrounded by people who now all know what we knew. And it's like, shit. Like, what do I know now? Like, I don't know anything, right? And the climate anxiety, just anxiety surrounding everything, can feel overbearing.
Yeah.
My biggest takeaway, I haven't done one of these in a really long time, was like the hope that you guys have, because it's lacking. Definitely, it's lacking in this department.
And
so,
it's easy to lose that.
so
Yeah.
it that was my biggest takeaway, and Nadia's resilience. So,
We all burn out. I feel like even just reflecting on kind of growing up with you, like we met when I think I was 18, and I mean I went to rehab between then and now. Like there's definitely, I feel like if I just think about like kind of the circle of young entrepreneurs and organizers, especially in the climate space actually that we started with, like probably more than half of them are no longer in the space because they're burnt out or depressed. Like, and that's the toll that it takes on people. And I think that like I'm very thankful to like still be in it, because, you know, I think that especially for the friends who like maybe didn't have access to like mental health resources or like time to just like breathe, like, yeah, it sucks.
But we have hope. We have hope. There's 18, 25, 18, or how old are you? 18. Like, there's hope. There's hope.
No, I love that you mentioned that, and I also really enjoyed learning about like just the vast difference in climate justice and like what it can look like and how everyone does things so differently. And I feel like each one of our approaches to doing something about it like is so different, which I love. Like there's like students, and then like us that are like people that are already like working, and then there's like entrepreneurship and like talking to like different countries and things. Like that's just like, I just love that like it's so different, and I've never met like such a group of people so different working around the same issue at the same time in the same space, which is like a big privilege to be here. So yeah. So
I echo that a lot, and I think it's always like interesting to have such different backgrounds because we all come at this based on our background. Like our life experience is why we believe what we believe, and like your explanation about like reparations and how like that could actually just start with investment now, like that's just not something that I had ever heard. And I think it's like a stereotype that reparations just means to like invest into people, like pay off past debts, but you're talking about like paying off future opportunities and like trying to invest in these communities. And I never thought about it that way, so that was really helpful to hear. And then I loved your comment about like mental health, because like I'm supposed to create a lot of social media content, but like when my mental health isn't good, like I don't want to do anything around around social media, especially knowing that there could be backlash. And I think it's so, like your comment about how no one can say something worse online than what you said to yourself is like so true.
I resonated with that for sure. And I personally am taking something away from each of you today, but I do want to emphasize, like, we can't solve every issue in one conversation. It's a great starting place. So all I hope is that we leave this room today with some better understanding about who each other is and why we believe what we believe, and hopefully we can continue that dialogue. So if it's okay with all of you, can we continue this conversation and keep it going?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm gonna have
Sweet.
solo conversations with myself about this.
Now we'll do it all together.
At 2 a.m.
That's,
Yeah.
I mean, not to reiterate, but that's what this is all about, right? The more we can have these conversations, hopefully with people who have different backgrounds, we can just come a little bit closer together just by that understanding. So
we can represent each other.
exactly.
Right.
And you don't have to change anyone's mind or bring someone over to your side, but we can coexist in who we are because we better understand each other. So I appreciate all of you for being here, and especially to Nadia and to August for partnering with us on this conversation. And I always like to just sign off by saying we really can't unify without you and I, in the same way you can't say you can't have, there's no I in team. Like it has to be a mutual effort. So thank you all for being a part of that process today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This
Thank
is
you.
awesome.
Thank you.
So we'll start a group text. We can exchange
Yeah.
numbers and we'll keep the conversation going.
Yes.
Oh, I got a new number. I'm now a senior science.
Hey, it's Ryan Feinberg from the Conversationalist community. Thanks so much for watching our POVz episode on climate. The best part about TC is that we want to hear everyone's points of view, including yours. Just text the word climate to 1-877-222-1119 to get access to all things TC, and we hope to feature you on a future episode. See you next time.